Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are here to talk about the movie that killed the swashbuckler genre for almost a decade, and the movie that killed Carolco Pictures. That's right, today we are talking about how 1995's Cutthroat Island came to be, why it failed, why it's kind of awesome, and its legacy 30 years later. Cutthroat Island is a movie that I definitely loved as a kid. We didn't own it on VHS or anything like that, but this was actually the first movie I ever saw on DVD. Crazy, right? I remember it so vividly. It was Y2K, and the concept of skipping chapters absolutely broke my 9-year-old brain. I don't even know if that was the first time I ever even saw Cutthroat Island, but obviously it made a big impression on me because DVDs were the future. But largely, this is a movie that I kind of forgot about after childhood. I always loved swashbucklers and watching people fight with swords and go after treasure, so I'm not sure why we never owned it, but it was a movie that I kind of forgot about for a number of years until I started to get a little more interested in film history, specifically the history of movies that flop. Here's the thing though, even though Cutthroat Island's script is a mess and some of the performances come across a little stiff, it's still kind of awesome. It's just pure spectacle fun. There's real explosions every 5 minutes. Tons of the action sequences are shot in slow motion for no real reason, other than it looks cool. And we even get to see Matthew Modine get hit in the head with a barrel. But before I start going too deep into everything that makes Cutthroat Island secretly an awesome movie, let's go back in time and learn just a bit more about how this movie came to be. The story for Cutthroat Island begins back in the early 90s with James Gorman and Michael Frost Beckner, who had a first look deal with Disney after the minor success of their movie Sniper that the two had written a few years earlier. Actually, Cutthroat Island was originally pitched to Michael Eisner as a potential vehicle for a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, which is kind of ironic considering that the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise would end up being the next pirate blockbuster 8 years later. So after Disney turned the movie down, the two took their script over to Carolco Pictures, who bought the movie for $1.7 million, and Renny Harland was brought on to direct based off the success of Die Hard 2, Die Harder, and Cliffhanger. And Harlan was able to convince producer Mario Kassar that Geena Davis should be cast in the lead role. Davis and Harlan had just gotten married and actually referred to the shooting of Cutthroat Island as their honeymoon. What's funny about Harlan trying to get Davis onto the movie is that just a few months later, they would both try and get off of the movie before realizing that their contracts were ironclad and they were locked in no matter what. With Harlan and Davis panicking that the movie wouldn't work, Harlan supposedly spent $1 million of his own money to hire Mark Norman to rewrite the script. And the script went through several rewrites throughout pre-production. There are a total of 6 screenwriters who are credited across different drafts of this movie, which is a lot and usually a good sign that a movie will end up being a mess. As for casting, originally this was supposed to be a two-hander with Michael Douglas as the co-lead with Davis, but he had 2 conditions. Filming had to begin as soon as possible because he had other filming obligations like The American President and The Ghost in the Darkness, and he and Davis had to have equal screen time. However, Douglas would leave the project after reading Norman's draft of the script and finding that Davis now had more screen time than him. There was also the fact that filming kept getting delayed, but I think Douglas knew this was a sinking ship immediately. Actually, it was Douglas quitting that really made Harlan and Davis want to jump ship. There are also rumors that Harlan and Douglas just had 2 completely different visions for the movie. Douglas was expecting to do Romancing the Stone but make it pirates, and Harlan wanted to make the biggest, loudest pirate movie that had ever been made. And after Douglas quit, Harlan was so preoccupied with script rewrites and trying to find a replacement for a leading man that the crew was forced to begin building sets for the movie without any oversight from Harlan, a decision that would end up costing the production millions of dollars. As once Harlan finally saw the sets that had been built, he requested a majority of them be torn down and rebuilt to his specifications. As for the recasting of the Shaw role, Tom Cruise, Keanu Reeves, Russell Crowe, Liam Neeson, Jeff Bridges, Ralph Fiennes, Charlie Sheen, Michael Keaton, Tim Robbins, and Daniel Day-Lewis all turned this movie down before the production finally turned to Matthew Modine. And it sounds like one of the main reasons Modine was cast is because he was already experienced with fencing and would need very little training to do the movie. In the years since, Modine has said that this was a miserable movie for him to make. Apparently, Harlan wouldn't really talk to or acknowledge him. He got hurt a bunch, like this barrel hitting his head in slow motion. One other funny bit of casting is that originally the late great Oliver Reed was hired to do a quick cameo in the movie, but was fired after getting into a bar fight and attempting to moon Geena Davis. Oh, Oliver, what a crazy guy. Speaking of people named Oliver, Cutthroat Island's original cinematographer, Oliver Wood, actually fell from a crane during the first week of shooting, breaking his leg, and he had to be replaced with cinematographer Peter Levy. Harlan also quickly fired the camera operator, Nicola Pecorini, after the two got into it, and his firing led to over a dozen additional crew members quitting the film in protest over Pecorini's firing. You know, I gotta say, it seems like Renny Harland may have been the problem here. Seems like he was feeling himself just a little too much, and Harlan does have a reputation for being a loser. I mean, he cheated on Geena Davis and fathered a daughter with Davis's assistant just a few years after this movie came out. As for the filming itself, Cutthroat Island filmed primarily on location in both Malta and Thailand, with the interior scenes shot at both the Mediterranean Film Studios in Malta and the famous Pinewood Studios in England. And filming took nearly 6 months, stretching from October of 1994 to April of 1995. And shocking absolutely no one, the budget of the movie was continually ballooning and causing everyone behind the scenes a lot of stress. Carolco already knew that if this movie didn't work, they were going to go bankrupt. So they put everything they had into it, trying to make this movie as big a hit as possible. But just 8 months after production wrapped, Cutthroat Island was released into theaters where it made just $2.3 million against its reported budget of $92 million and placed 11th at the box office, which would be its highest placement at the US box office. The movie would go on to make a domestic total of $10 million and a worldwide total of just $16 million. And critics didn't care for the movie much either, most pointing to the messy script and lack of chemistry between Davis and Modine. There were a few critics who were able to put all that aside and just enjoy the movie for the spectacle it was. Like Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars and praised the practical effects and skills behind the camera. Cutthroat Island would actually go on to be in the Guinness Book of World Records as the biggest flop in Hollywood history. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time we dive deep into Cutthroat Island and take a look at all of the things that do actually work in this movie, because I think there's a lot more here than most people would think. And before I go any further, here is your one and only spoiler warning for a movie that came out 30 years ago. If we're looking at what makes Cutthroat Island awesome, I think the most obvious place to start is with the cinematography. Peter Levy knocks the look of this movie out of the park. This movie just feels like a pirate movie. It uses rich, earthy tones and combines that with romantic lighting to create a movie that looks and feels like we're looking at an old pirate map. Especially once we get to the titular Cutthroat Island, like the whole movie looks great, but it really feels like a step up in cinematography once we get to the actual island. I think a big part of that is that I'm just a sucker for overly blue water in movies. Something about it just really captures my imagination. Not only that, but the action sequences in this movie are just on another level. Sure, they may lean on slow motion a little too much, but overall they are absolutely thrilling and beautiful to look at. Cutthroat Island also has a lot of explosions, like a lot. And every time one goes off, you can practically feel the heat radiating through the screen. And a big part of that is that we see the actors reacting to the real explosions around them. There's even this moment where Matthew Modine gets hit in the head with a barrel. There's also John Debney's excellent score, which is incredibly grand and adventurous with sweeping strings and a powerful brass section. It's one of the parts of the movie that was immediately met with praise, because how can you hear something like this and not immediately start thinking about pirate adventures and the open sea? As for the story of the movie, we follow the adventure of Morgan Adams, played by Geena Davis, as she races against her uncle Dog Brown, played by Frank Langella, to collect the 3 pieces of a map leading to Cutthroat Island, where there is a massive amount of treasure supposedly hidden. And the plot of this movie is really one of the worst aspects of the movie. I think the story it's trying to tell is fine. It's a pretty straightforward adventure, race against time, looking for MacGuffins kind of story, but it's also not the most engaging. I never really feel like anything is actually at stake for any of the characters. It all begins with Morgan rushing to save her father, who's been kidnapped and is being tortured by Dog. She does make it in time. Unfortunately, it's just in time to watch him get shot, but like a badass, she carries her dying father and swims from this ship to shore all by herself at night. And he tells her about the 3 pieces of the map and reveals that his piece is tattooed on his scalp. So he tells her to shave his head and cut off his scalp. Honestly, this scene is badass, and it's one of the coolest ways I've ever seen a treasure map portrayed in a movie. Morgan having the first piece of the map is great and all, except for the fact that it's written in Latin and neither she nor any of the men on her ship speak Latin, which introduces us to Matthew Modine as William Shaw. We meet Shaw at this big fancy party set, and he's ripping off tiaras and jewelry from the wealthy women at the party before he gets caught. And I did actually laugh out loud after he jumps and then backs right up the stairs, realizing that he's surrounded. The meeting of Shaw and Morgan also low-key reminds me of Evie and O'Connell meeting for the first time in The Mummy, but the action sequence with Morgan and Shaw escaping from Port Royal after she's been recognized is just excellent from start to finish, and again, the score from John Debney is fantastic. Not only that, but we get this awesome bit of the chase interrupting a funeral procession for a religious figure, and I love that we see the skull fall and shatter for no real reason other than it looks cool. There's also this absolutely insane stunt done by Geena Davis, where she crashes through this window, rolls down this ledge, and lands in the carriage. And I went frame by frame. There's no Texas switches here or anything like that. She fully did this stunt, and I really can't tell if Modine's shocked face is genuine or him acting here. Actually, in doing research, I learned that one of the times she attempted to do this stunt, she was way too early and ended up essentially being run over by the carriage. Once our crew has made their escape, they're on to get the next piece of the map from Morgan's uncle Mordecai. And Mordecai agrees to join Morgan and her crew and find the treasure. Unfortunately for everyone, Dog and his men show up, and we get yet another giant, insane action set piece with explosions and Matthew Modine getting hit in the head with a barrel in slow motion. In the scuffle with Dog and his men, Mordecai is killed, Morgan is shot, and Shaw secretly finds and takes Mordecai's portion of the map. Back on Morgan's ship, Shaw has to remove the bullet from Morgan, and the two finally kiss. And look, I really just don't think that Davis and Modine have good chemistry in this movie, and I have to imagine it has something to do with the fact that Davis had just married Harlan, who was directing the movie. Like I said, Modine has said that Harlan barely spoke to him on set, and I think it really kills the chemistry between these two. That being said, they're both professionals, and even without strong chemistry, I do still buy that these two are into each other. Now that we've got 2 pieces of the map, we have enough information to begin making our way to Cutthroat Island. Unfortunately for Morgan, during a big storm, her crew mutiny, and she and those loyal to her are thrown into a boat in the middle of the storm. But joke's on the bad guys, because the storm and current carry our heroes directly to Cutthroat Island. And the second half of this movie is definitely a blast, and I have to imagine was at least a little bit of an inspiration for the later Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And I get why. The jungle is an excellent set piece for any sort of cat and mouse chase. We also get a classic 90s movie quicksand scene that only kinda sorta scarred me as a kid because he doesn't die, but
I always thought that quicksand was gonna be a much bigger problem than it turned out to be.
the best part of the island isn't the jungle, it's the cave where all of the treasure is held. First of all, Morgan and Shaw rappelling down the cliffside is another badass stunt that both of them actually did, they just painted out the wires later. Once we're in the cave though, that's where the movie is firing on all cylinders. It's cool as hell and a mix of both real caves and caverns and sets built on a soundstage. But the entire set piece feels like one cohesive location. And of course, when the two do find the treasure, it's Debney's excellent score that brings the whole thing together. Unfortunately, Dog and his men are waiting for them as they attempt to climb out of the cave. But this leads to another cool as hell stunt, with the two jumping from the rope and landing in the ocean below. And look, obviously I can tell the shot of them about to hit the rocks is a composite, but it still looks cool as hell and is such a great little bit of tension. Even though the two escape death and Dog, it's only for a minute because Dog and the Royal Navy have teamed up and are taking the treasure for themselves. All of this leads to the big final battle of the movie that sees Morgan sneaking onto Dog's ship via the anchor and freeing her men, which just totally rocks. And I mean, what can I say about this final battle that I haven't already said about all of the other action set pieces? It looks incredible, the score is fantastic, and it's all done practically. Like, I haven't said this yet, but these two pirate ships are real. Harlan, being the insane person he is, commissioned two life-sized functional pirate ships to be used in the movie. This giant ship exploding, that's real. They really blew up a pirate ship for this movie, and Morgan and Shaw diving off the ship in the nick of time is just excellent adventure filmmaking. So the movie ends with Morgan and Shaw together with the treasure and splitting it with their men, and the crew sail for Madagascar to live out their lives. So 30 years later, what is the legacy of Cutthroat Island? Well, like I said, it's literally in the Guinness Book of World Records as one of the biggest financial failures in box office history, having lost upwards of over $100 million. And it was the catalyst for Carolco Pictures going bankrupt and closing their doors. Granted, the company was already in deep financial trouble by the time they greenlit Cutthroat Island, but when the movie failed, it was all over for them. However, in the years since, I do feel like Cutthroat Island has been reclaimed just a bit. Most everyone acknowledges that yes, it's a bad movie, but sometimes bad movies can be great in spite of themselves. And I think Cutthroat Island is a movie that succeeds despite all of its flaws. Especially now that we live in a world where movies like this don't really get made anymore, and when they do, they tend to be drowning in CGI characters and backgrounds. You could put Cutthroat Island on for any person who likes the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and they're going to have a great time. It's not a good movie, but it is a great time. As far as Renny Harland is concerned, he and Davis would work on one more movie together as a couple, 1996's The Long Kiss Goodnight, which did a hell of a lot better at the box office than Cutthroat Island. But like I said, Harland would throw his marriage to Davis away in 1997, and the two haven't worked together again since. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons who produced this video. You all help make these videos possible. If you'd like to be credited as an executive producer or producer, you can find a link to the Patreon in the description below. Patrons get to help me pick which movies to cover on the channel, early access to videos, and access to an exclusive Discord server. Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.